In 1982, an 18-year-old named Alex Lewis woke in a hospital after an intense coma. He was put in this coma from a motorcycle accident and he completely lost his memory. He lost everything about himself, about who he was. But when he turned to his right and saw the man sitting beside him, he knew that that was his twin brother Marcus. From that day on, Alex would learn everything again, from tying his shoes to making toast, and Marcus would teach him how to live again. But he would leave out a terrifying secret that wouldn't come to the surface for 20 years later. By the way, my name is Melissa and I make a true crime video once a week, a crime that has been heavy on my mind. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Okay, so before we get into today's case, I know some of you have seen this. It blew up on Netflix. It was very similar to Abducted in Plain Sight, that sort of hype, because it really is unbelievable. Today we're talking about the documentary Tell Me Who I Am, which follows identical twins Alex and Marcus. It's a harrowing story that you won't quite believe, but it is extremely real. If you haven't seen this documentary, watch my video first and then go over to Netflix and watch it, because this really is an extraordinary story. So in 1982, Alex Lewis wakes up in the hospital after suffering a severe coma. He was 18 years old at the time when he fell off his motorbike and it gave him severe brain damage. But thankfully he survived, although in the process he had lost everything. He didn't know his name, he didn't know where he was, and he had the mental age of about a 9-year-old. But as I said, as soon as he turned to the right and saw the man next to his bed, he knew that was his twin brother Marcus, and he said, "Hello, Marcus," which is extraordinary. The fact that twins just have that insane connection, I think it's astounding that he lost everything, but he was able to recognise that was his twin. His twin, as I said, was named Marcus, and they were identical twins, so they looked very, very similar, and they were both 18 at the time. They grew up in Sussex, which is in Kent in England, and their families were extremely well off. Their mother was a woman named Jill, and she was a huge woman. She was like 6 foot, she had massive hands, massive feet, which may not seem relevant, but it will be later. So back to that day, Jill, the mother, turns up and she's obviously distraught because her son's in this state. And he doesn't remember her. So she starts going, "You remember me, don't you? You know who I am?" And Alex is just like, "No, I don't know you," which is obviously very tough for a mother to accept. But he really just didn't know who she was, and she wouldn't let it go. She was constantly asking him, "You know who I am, right? You know who I am?" But he didn't. The only person he knew was his twin brother, Marcus. So they're driving home and Alex is obviously confused. He's in the car with a complete stranger driving to his home, which he does not know. But he's got his brother Marcus there. And from that point on, Marcus was his rock. He was essentially his carer and he taught him everything. His mental age was that of a 9-year-old, so he really didn't know much. Marcus taught him how to make a cup of tea, how to tie his shoelaces, how to make toast, everything, you know, down to going to the toilet again. But because Marcus was so hands-on with his twin, he wanted to help him through this. Alex recovered remarkably, and from 1 month he went from the mental age of a 9-year-old to around a 14 to 15-year-old. So already he's not far off of his actual age of 18. So as Alex developed or got older, he began to start asking more personal questions. You know, when you get older, you start wondering about more unusual things, and he went to his brother Marcus for these answers. So he would ask, "How was mum and dad growing up? Did we go on holidays? What was our childhood like?" And Marcus would be like, "Yeah, mum and dad are cool. We went on loads of holidays and we're really lucky." And as I said to you, right, Their parents were well off, like they were sitting on millions. So it wasn't just like they had a bit of money, they were stinking rich. And they grew up in this massive 16th century property in Sussex, and that's where the boys lived, although they didn't actually live in the home. Now, when Marcus started explaining the rules of the house, this is when it got a bit difficult for Alex. So the boys weren't allowed a house key at 18 years old. They weren't allowed in certain wings of the house. Jill and their father would not let them in certain places. And when Alex got home from his accident, it's actually their stepfather, sorry, he was extremely cold and he just shook his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Dad." And Marcus explained that he's a very strict man and he doesn't speak a lot, and you can only go to his study and see him if you're summoned there. So if you're asked to go, then you can go. And we must address Dad as Sir. But you know, Alex being the way he is, he didn't question this and he just thought this was a normal thing that all families go through. As I said, they didn't live in the house, they actually lived in the shed outside. And to me and you, this seems bizarre because why wouldn't they live in this massive house? There's obviously enough room for them. But Alex just nodded on and got on with it because who was he to question his brother, his twin, the man that has basically raised him again? So Marcus started showing Alex pictures of them as young boys when they were on holiday. He explained in one picture that they went to France and that they would get ice cream and they'd play in the sea and it was so much fun. And what would happen is Marcus would show Alex a photo and he would construct a memory, and then Alex would program that in his brain, you know. So Marcus would explain something and he would just believe that and take that in internally, and he started to form quite a happy life. You know, they had money, they went on holidays, and Alex felt pretty good about life again. Marcus would show Alex a photo, he would explain what the photo was, and Alex thought nothing else of it. He thought they had this idyllic life, but that was far from the truth. So, going back to Jill and their father, they were very eccentric people. So Jill was like this really big, tall lady. She had loads and loads of friends. They had dinner parties constantly, house parties, and the house was just constantly flooded with people. Also, they were hoarders, like bad. So the house was just full of crap. Jill was an antique seller, so she had a lot of stuff around the house, a lot of trophies, a lot of ornaments, you know. So the house was quite cluttered. And through his own assumptions, Alex just thought, wow, like our mum is so cool, you know, she's got all this money, she has all these friends, we have all these parties, you know, like anyone would like a mum like that where you've got people round having parties, having dinner parties. He just thought, wow, like I really love my mum, and he grew to really love her again. Alex didn't question anything that Marcus said. He was like, okay, cool, bro, you know, he had no reason to doubt him. So a few months into his recovery, he's pretty much back at the age of about 17, 18. So Marcus believes that it's time for Alex to meet their friends, and Alex had a girlfriend as well, which is so funny. And he says how he lost his virginity twice to the same girl. But yeah, he introduces Alex back to his friends. Like these are his good friends, you know. So what Alex does is he doesn't even bother like getting to know them, explaining everything. He just believes Marcus and just continues the friendship, builds on the friendship that they have from them meeting him again, if that makes sense, because he knew they were actually his friends, and he just carried on his relationship and everything was good. Now, something about Alex is that he took photos constantly. He took photos of everyone drinking, eating, and they had a ball, you know, they were 18 as well. So when he got his memory back, they just started to party and just have fun. And there's so many images online, I'll try and include some. But he just was so scared of ever losing his memory again, you know. It must be scary thing. So he just decided to take photos of absolutely everything, and he believed every moment was worth capturing. So a few years later, their stepdad actually developed cancer, and he was very, very ill and pretty much on his deathbed. So one day he calls in the twins, Alex and Marcus, and as he's dying, he says to the boys, "Will you forgive me? Will you forgive me for what I've done?" And Alex is just a sweet boy, you know, he just sobs and he's like, "Yes, Dad, of course, like, no matter what you've done, I forgive you." And Marcus just looks at his dad and just says, "No, I will not forgive you." And then he just gets up and walks out the room. So Alex is like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, how can you not forgive a dying man? That's our dad. Like, what's the problem?" And Marcus is just like, "I can't forgive him. Like, don't worry about it." Alex is just like, "But why?" And Marcus just says, "I just can't." It was a really tense moment, but after that it was dropped, and then shortly later their dad died. So then moving on about 5 years later, when the boys were about 30 years old, their mother actually also developed cancer and she died suddenly. Alex took this so bad because he was so close with his mum. He really had grown to love her, but Marcus showed no emotion when their mum died, and Alex also took this as extremely weird. Alex would cry and cry and cry, and Marcus didn't shed a single tear. He just did not seem to care. And I didn't mention this, but they also had two other siblings, I believe a boy and a girl. Their names aren't out there though. When the mum died, the other siblings also just didn't care. Like they didn't cry, you know? So Alex is like, "What the hell is going on? Like, mum and dad are both dead and no one gives a shit," you know? It was so weird for him. So then the boys had the job of cleaning through this massive mansion, you know? They had to kind of get rid of things, like I think they were going to sell it potentially. So, you know, as I said, this house was full of crap city, right? So it took them about a year to get through everything. And one day they are cleaning the house, getting rid of everything, and they go into one of the bathrooms, and there's a massive, massive wardrobe. And they open the wardrobe, and when they look inside, they find hundreds of sex toys. And Marcus just didn't say anything. Again, he didn't seem to have an opinion. And Alex was just like, "What the hell?" You know, it's really weird to find that of your parents. And there were so many. And that's when Alex started asking more and more questions. And the secret was about to come out. Marcus told Alex to ignore it and not worry about it, and then they went into the attic, where again there was another wardrobe, and as they were cleaning through it, they found a secret compartment in the back of the wardrobe, and they opened it, and what they found in the back of that wardrobe would change their lives forever. When they opened the compartment, there was a single photograph, and it was on its back, so you could just see the white paper. And when they took it out and turned it around, on the photograph was a picture of the boys, about 10 years old, naked on a beach with their heads cut off. Yeah, let that sink in for a second, because that is disturbing as hell. Alex describes feeling sick and confused. Why would mum have this photo of us? That doesn't make any sense. And you know, the way it was so like secretly put there, like it was so well constructed, you know, that's what makes it even worse. Like it was so special to her that it had to have its own place. And I just can't even imagine how you would feel like finding that as someone's child. But Marcus didn't seem to react either. He just kept saying to his brother, "Don't worry about it." But things had gotten too far at this point. So if you haven't worked it out yet, everything Marcus told Alex about his life was a lie. He painted this idyllic childhood, this idyllic life, because what their life was actually like was so dark and disturbing that he didn't want his brother to have to relive it and to know what happened. It was all a fantasy. All of the holiday pictures, they did go on holiday, but not with their parents. They'd go with other family members or friends. Their parents never took them anywhere. They also never received birthday, Christmas presents at all, and as they're clearing through the house, they would later find hundreds of birthday and Christmas presents addressed to them by friends and family, but they grew up with absolutely nothing. So, back to them finding the photo, Alex and Marcus just decide to go downstairs, and Marcus makes a cup of tea like us Brits do when we're in some stressful situations. And he just makes his cup of tea, and then Alex walks in and just says, "Were we sexually abused?" And Marcus turns around, drops his cup of tea on the floor because he's so shocked that Alex has said this. And all he can do is just nod yes before going into the garden and just crying his eyes out. And Alex joins him and they both just cry. So, secrets out of the bag. He hid this for nearly 20 years, but we're going to discuss later what we think, because some people think that he was wrong for doing that, others think that he was right for doing that. I definitely know what my opinion is, but we'll get into that later. So, after this day, Marcus refused to tell Alex the extent of the abuse that they suffered, and Alex really struggled with this and actually attempted to find out on his own. He looked into the kind of woman his mother was, and he found out that she was, you know, having affairs with men. She prioritized sex over her children, so she was not a very good mother. And she actually put them up for adoption when they were babies at one point because she didn't consider them to be important. But what we need to remember is that Alex only has the memory of when he's 18, so everything that he knew about her was nice because she had stopped abusing them at 14 years old. So let's explain. So what's so shocking about the documentary is that the brothers come together for the first time and Marcus reveals all. And we actually see Alex hear about the abuse the same time. So it really is a raw moment. But what actually happened when they were younger, and what Marcus explains in his own words, is that when they were little, his mum would bring them both into her bed and molest them. She would get them to touch one another, and that's not even the worst of it. She would essentially traffic her children. She would drive one twin into London to stay the night with an artist or a public speaker, a very well-off gentleman in her mum's circle. The mum would stay for dinner and a few glasses of wine, and then she would leave her son with this man, drive home, and then come back in the morning to pick her son up. Yeah. And obviously, what happened was these men would molest the boys, and this started at a very young age. They never went together, never. She would take one at a time and then she would pick them up in the morning and drive them back home, and they'd go to sleep in their shed. It's honestly gut-wrenching. So how did it all stop? So one day when the boys were 14 years old, Marcus was driven up by Mummy to go to some sick pervert's house in London. She stayed for her dinner, she had her wine, whatever, and then she left. Marcus was in bed with this man, and the man started, touching him. And when he got down to his genitals, Marcus just said no. He said, "I don't want to, don't fucking touch me," basically. And this is the first time he'd ever stood up for himself because he was a child, you know. So the guy gets really aggressive and they start having like a fight, you know, and Marcus eventually escapes. Now he walks to the tube station, right? Finds out the directions to where he lives, gets the train home, goes to his shed and goes to sleep, right? The next day he walks into the house, sits down for breakfast, and Mama Jill turns around and she is gobsmacked, you know? She was about to pick him up and he's already at home. And they never said a word to each other. She didn't say a single thing, and neither did he. He just gave her that look, you know. You can imagine, like, he just giving her that look, like, you don't fucking own me anymore, you know. And after that, it never happened again. The abuse never happened again. And that was around the time, sorry, that they were moved into the shed because she obviously thought, oh, I've got no use for you anymore, you know. And yeah, it stopped at around 14. So now you can see like why Marcus was kind of, obviously he wasn't okay with his mum at all, but the abuse wasn't happening when they were 18, so that's why he was able to still live there. And Alex had such a close relationship with his mum because she obviously wasn't pimping them out anymore. Not that that makes any excuse for her. And yeah, so Marcus tells Alex this on camera, and they just hug, and Alex says that he needs this closure, you know, he needs to know who he is. Also, just a side note, I read that the other siblings were abused. I think just the boy, and he never knew that this happened to the twins, and the twins never knew it happened to him. They all thought that they were the only one being abused, and they grew up with each other their whole life, not discussing it until this all came out. But you know what's the most frustrating thing is that both of these sickos died without having to get punished for what they did. However, I do want to say that Marcus and Alex believe that their dad had no idea that this abuse was going on. I don't know, it seems weird, but I don't understand why Marcus said he wouldn't forgive his dad. Maybe that was just for other shit, like how he was, like, he's quite a strict man. Maybe it was that, or maybe it's because he had guilt towards him for the fact that he didn't stop it. He didn't recognize what was happening. But Jill, like I said in the beginning, she was like 6 foot. She was like 6'2". She had big hands, big feet. She just, can you imagine like the force she would have over them as little boys? It's just heart wrenching. But there's a lot of backlash from Alex to Marcus because Alex was fuming that Marcus lied to him all this time. He created this idyllic fantasy life, and he said that he would have rather known because he feels like his whole life was a lie, and the one person he relied on the most lied to him. But this is where I'm coming in with my opinion, right? I think that is love. I think what Marcus did was like amazing. Like I would want that, you know. I think that's love. I think that is pure love. He didn't want to put his brother through all of that trauma, and he also said that he was helping himself at the same time. By living this lie to his brother, it made him forget about his trauma, you know. So I think it was a beneficial thing to do. And as I keep saying, I just think that's the ultimate price of love, you know. He wanted to protect his brother from like such a traumatic past. But the brothers are they're great friends. Obviously, they run their businesses together. They both have 2 children each now, and they're actually releasing a book on the story. And I hope they make a shit ton of money because they deserve it. Not that any amount of money can help the abuse they went through because it is just absolutely traumatic. You don't really hear about stuff like this, and this genuinely is a case of sex trafficking. Um, like it's not just someone getting grabbed off the street, like, you know what I mean? Like people are doing this to their own children, and I just think it's absolutely amazing. It's a powerful story how he lied for his brother and then it all came crashing down. But I would love to know what you guys think. Do you think Marcus should have been honest, or do you think what he did was the right thing? He says himself that if the shoe was reversed, if the shoe was on the other foot, he would want Alex to lie for him as well, because that's a pretty heavy thing to have to take on after you've suffered such a severe accident. I don't think he would have been able to handle it. But yeah, it's a really powerful story. So please let me know what you guys think. And if you haven't checked this out on Netflix, go and watch it right now. It is an amazing watch. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next week. Bye.